Welcome. It's been a while. It's good to see some new faces, somewhat familiar surroundings. Can anybody remember when we were last in this this facility? I can't. I mean, it's pre-COVID.
Yeah, pre-COVID. BC, before COVID.
You did your presentation on the cold water immersion.
Oh, well, that doesn't help me. I mean, the cold water affects my memory, so I can't remember when that was. But anyways, and then we've kind of been like gypsies ever since, doing a lot of looking for a roof over our head. And I don't know about you guys, but I've always enjoyed going into Linden. I love flying in and out of there, especially as compared to Bellingham. And you couldn't, as far as we know, and I don't know for how long it's been, they've offered us the best price on fuel of any place I know, and the friendliest reception. So it was really great that they just opened their doors to us and made that pilot lounge available, and for the meetings we've had there that got us going again. And so as a thank you to the Linden group, if I would have Bob and Bill step up.
Oh, nice.
Oh, okay, no Bill. Oh, he's going to stand in the back. Okay. These guys are with the airport. Are you just calling yourselves the airport committee, or what's airport advisory?
Actually, Tom is the new chairman.
Oh,
I missed the meeting.
That's what happens.
Hired and he made me the chairman.
that'll teach you.
Don't miss a meeting.
Absolutely. So these guys, for those of you who have made the meetings at Linden, you know the pilot lounge. It's such a great place for pilots just stopping in, but they made it available for us, put up the chairs and supplied the coffee and the sweets and all that. And that's what allowed us to get back and up and running until we're back here now. I'd prefer actually to be up at Linden, but this certainly has better connectivity issues. That was always a challenge for us. The speakers show up and, oh my gosh, can we get their stuff on the screen?
Yeah.
And so anyways, a big applause to the Linden group. Sure enough. And as you guys know, we, or maybe if you're not familiar with our, sit down. You don't have, nobody gave you the floor.
Bill, we here at the No Sound chapter appreciate you being our president. And you've been at it for quite a while, and I've been with you as vice president, and we'd like to show you our appreciation.
But now you're catching me. I don't have one for you. We can trade. Okay.
Yeah, re-gift it.
As soon as you're president, you get this.
Oh, I've got a couple of them for being president, so that's okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right,
well,
congratulations.
All's fair and welcome. Very good. For those of you whose memory goes back, we didn't used to meet on the first Thursday. We modified it this week just so our speaker could accommodate and make his presentation. Mark is from Bellingham. He also hides down in Arizona when the weather is not to his liking. But this is his first trip to Alaska. And as you can see, he was working around the weather. He had some great flying days. For those of you who don't know, the view of this mountain, that's McKinley or Denali. It was the view of the mountain back in '72. I had one look at that mountain. I hitchhiked up there just with the idea of passing through. And I saw that mountain. I went to Park Service headquarters, and I was there for over 40 years. Not just in the park, I mean throughout the state, working as a pilot. But I saw, that's the one of the tallest vertical walls in the world. And it's not the summit, it's the north summit that you're seeing there. But the base of the mountain is at about 2,200. The north peak is 19,500 or something, as I recall. So it's been climbed, but only twice. It shed avalanches like crazy. But twice a team has gotten up that face to it. And for the last 10 years I was flying up there, I flew out of Talkeetna, which is the nearest settlement or town to this mountain. And I was going, or attempting going with the weather, go through and or around that mountain several times a day. And I just saw it in all its phases as far as weather and seasons and winds and rain, snow, darkness and everything. But yeah, it's just, I'm so looking forward to Mark's photos and description. So without further ado,
Okay.
Mark, if you'd head up and greet us.
All right. Well, thanks. So Bill probably will know more about my presentation than I do, given his vast experience in Alaska. But I think that's great, and hopefully what I say will resonate with him. And if nothing else, I think everybody who likes flying, loves flying, will get something out of this, because it's just was a trip with a lot of passion about flying for me. And I love the trip, and I just enjoy sharing the experience with people who also enjoy flying. So I think you'll like it. There's a series of slides here so we can cover some facts if you are contemplating a trip yourself. I went to a few presentations like this one because I'm a relatively inexperienced pilot. I got my pilot's license in 2011 and my instrument rating in 2016. But I fly a lot. I've got about 1,700 hours a time. So I'm flying a lot for recreational purposes, not commercial purposes. So I've had the good fortune to be able to do big trips like this and other trips. So anyway, I'm probably at less experience than most of the people in the room, but I have a lot of enthusiasm. So I think you'll enjoy the presentation and share the joy of flying with me here. So the first part of this, I'll do a little bit of a slideshow with some facts, and if people want those facts for their own planning purposes, this is being recorded, and the video will be available of this part, and then the PowerPoint slide pack can be linked to it. And so if you say, hey, there's a link on there I want, you should be able to get it after the fact when this is published. So, so that might be helpful if anybody is thinking about a trip. And then I've got a video that's about 22 minutes that's mostly clips and short video clips and still photos put together on iMovie and put to some music that I think you'll enjoy. So that's the maybe just more fun part of this. But there's a few important facts I thought I'd share, and we can get some credit for it as well. So this, I didn't know the name of the face on Denali, but yeah, I was just blown away by the scenery up there. So let's go, whoops. I gotta go next, I guess. There we go.
Can you turn the lights a little bit?
Sure. Is this one maybe? Oops. Oops. Is there one in the back you can get?
No.
Which way?
That's what
Off or?
Oh, I'd say you try it off.
Will that work for you?
No, if you can just leave that one.
Oh, you need that?
Yeah, okay. All right, well, we'll make this work. All right, so, the internet's wonderful. And so, of course, the AOPA has a really comprehensive website that has all kinds of information, excellent links for planning border crossing and flying to Alaska. So, if you're planning your own trip, the resources are kind of unlimited, and there is a link there that I used that still has a lot of, just checked it, it's still got a lot of great information. I'm going to cover border crossing, Canadian requirements for U.S. pilots and planes, not comprehensively, just some important things that sort of jumped out at me that I didn't know and I thought would be good to know. Some Canadian flight rule differences, the equipment requirements, which were interesting. Both Alaska and Canada had specific requirements for equipment, which a lot of people probably didn't even take the time to know. Weather resources are a little different in Alaska, and then there's a lot of special flight rules areas, and visual reporting points are incredibly important for the congested traffic in some of these areas. And so there's a lot of planning you can do, and it's wonderful now that most of us probably are using ForeFlight. You can make your waypoints from the coordinates that are in the special flight rules visual reporting points, and then you're not wondering when they say I'm over such and such local geographic thing, where is that? Because you can have it named on your iPad. So there's some things that make it much easier than it might have been in the old days when you were kind of an outsider looking in and wondering, where are they and where am I relative to that reporting point? There's also some interesting things about Alaska Native village considerations. So many of the villages have various levels of alcohol restrictions, and some are quite severe. You don't want to be caught out with the wrong contraband in your plane. You can lose your plane in certain villages. So interesting to know, and there's a resource in here to help avoid those kind of misunderstandings. And then I'll end with that scenic video. So this shot here was at Lake Clark National Park on the west side of Cook Inlet and over the range there. So I'll cover the route we went over, and I think you'll find the route amazing. And we were just fortunate on weather, but you kind of make the weather be fortunate by not going until it's good weather. So our plan changed literally from the morning I planned to launch. So the very first morning we were going to go to Port Hardy to get fuel and clear customs. Well, Port Hardy was unforecast fog socked in, so there was no going there. So after filing all the paperwork the night before, I had to refile all the border crossing paperwork and go to Campbell River, where that was our first stop. And that was pretty representative of the whole trip. It was always a change. Every time we were on the ground, we were looking at maybe a different plan. So if you're flexible, the only challenge with that is if you go in this time of year we did, which was late June, accommodations are really booked up then. So you're taking your chances about not having a place to stay if you're having to change plans all the time. But we were able to find accommodations at every place we went, even on short notice. So it's not impossible to do and have accommodations. So in terms of the border crossing requirements, most of you are probably more experienced at this than I am, but you've got the passports, of course, the EAPIS, U.S. Customs Border Patrol. You got to give them advance notice. This used to say 1 hour prior to arrival and departure, and then there was a note that just came out this week that they've changed that to 2 hours prior notice and prior to arrival in Bellingham. They want a 2 hour advance notice to come back. You got to keep and print your confirmation email, and of course call in 2 hours prior to returning. And they said not, let me try to go back. They said not to exit the airplane until they approach you. So that's important to not jump out of your plane when you get here, because they might not start off on the best foot with customs. And so you don't want to do that. You need a current and annual U.S. Customs sticker that you can get from the Department of Homeland Security. You really want to do a CanPass private aircraft program for traveling to Canada. It opens up your airports of entry vastly so that there's many more places you can go on your first stop in Canada. The CBSA, you call them 2 to 48 hours prior, and you get a verbal passenger manifest and obtain a manifest number. For those that haven't flown there, often what I think happens is you land and you wait for 15 minutes, and if nobody shows up, then you're good to go if you're on the CanPass system and you are at one of the extended list of airports that you can, airports of entry for CanPass. So that's what we did. We avoided too much administrative stuff by going to, Campbell River was the first stop. And then we went to Whitehorse. I'll come back to this, but we crossed the border 7 times, I think, and it was all driven by weather. So, and yeah, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I see there might be some puzzled looks here.
How many of you, who traveled with you?
Just my wife and myself, yeah, in a Cessna 182. Yeah, it was a good airplane for this mission. And of course, you have to get a discrete transponder code for crossing the lower 48 border. I didn't know whether that applied up further north, and it doesn't. You don't have the same requirements going from Alaska into the Yukon. So, I was kind of a little anxious about that, but, it's kind of a different world up there. So that was a surprise to me, but it wasn't difficult. And then the things that sort of stood out to me flying in Canada, I studied a lot of trying to understand the differences. One is that you have to have a third-class medical because they don't recognize basic med in Canada, of course. And you need a restricted radio telephone operator's permit, and you also need a radio station license, which I think used to be requirements in the US a long time ago, and they're still available. You can go on the internet and you can buy those licenses, but they were still required in Canada, or at least they were at the time I went. If anybody knows if that's not the case anymore, but it was certainly true when we went. And not that anybody was checking, but I wanted to go buy the book and have everything in place. And then standard airworthiness certificate, no experimental aircraft, so Cessna 182 fit the bill, and proof of insurance in Canada. Almost all your coverage will cover Canada and often Mexico. A couple of shots here, Williston Lake. We came back on what I'll describe later as the trench route, and we went up on the coastal route. So that was Port Hardy on the right and Williston Lake on the way back. Some other things that jumped out at me, VFR, IFR, well really VFR, if you're on an IFR flight plan, you're cleared, but you need an explicit clearance almost like a Class Bravo in the US. So you can't just have established communications with Charlie Airspace and say that you're cleared. You have to have an explicit clearance. Class F is different. There's no Class F in the US, but there is in Canada for military or danger areas, warning areas, where there could be dangerous things like blasting on the ground or other hazards to aviation. And then some non-towered airports require the use of a mandatory frequency, and non-towered airports may have an airport traffic frequency, so some of the terminology is different, but in effect there's not too many differences that are material. They're fairly explicit in the rules, though, that you need to give 5-minute notice in advance of arrival, provide an estimated time of landing and your position and altitude at 5 minutes out, 10 miles or so is a good place to call. And then monitoring and using 126.7 is a really good idea when not under flight following, which doesn't really exist much anyway. So most of BC and Yukon doesn't have much in the way of radar coverage. So you're really looking at kind of like old school times, you know, checking in for your own safety to help people understand where you are and expected times that you're going to be at your next place. I think it's maybe on the next slide, your flight plans are automatically opened in Canada, so that's something to keep in mind, because if you're a little sloppy on that, they'll come looking for you at great expense possibly. Oxygen is required above 10,000 feet in Canada, not in the US, but it is in Canada, so that's something to think about. We didn't have to go above 10,000 feet on this trip. Even though I think I had one instrument leg I filed, not 2 legs, but they were both low altitude legs. So it didn't actually matter. And most of the people I talked to about flying in Alaska said there's not much instrument flying in Alaska because you're either so high because of the terrain, you're in weather or icing or something for an airplane like mine. So I had the oxygen in case I needed to do that. But a little bit traffic pattern entry is a slightly different for Canadian. Crossing midfield at pattern altitude is the normal procedure as opposed to a 45-degree to downwind in the US. Although you can fly this in the US as well, it's just the recommended pattern is a little different. So survival equipment requirements, that was something that I did some research on because there's actually laws that say you're supposed to carry certain things if you're in Canada or Alaska, and it varies by season. So in the summer, the winter season is really a long list. You'd be hard-pressed even in a 182 to have 2 people and all the gear you're supposed to have. So the weight limits could become a factor, but for summer, it's still a fairly extensive list.
When does winter start?
I don't remember the cutoff date. I want to say that it's maybe October 1st to, don't quote me, you should look it up, but that, if you look up those references, the Alaska, that's an Alaska state law number. So Alaska, if you typed Alaska 0235110, it'll give you the details if you just Google that. And the same thing for the Canadian car. It'll tell you the seasonal, cutoffs, but I was glad I was nowhere near those because the extensive list got a lot more extensive. Survival gear for winter conditions is pretty significant. So, a lot of it makes good sense to have, right? I mean, you might not think of these things, but you would sure want to have them if you had a problem. And I thought one of those more interesting ones in Alaska was 1 mosquito head net was required for each occupant. I thought that was fairly interesting. It must be some people that have gone insane from the mosquitoes by being in the, yeah, they were carried off. And then signaling devices, which you know they have some suggestions. If you don't have a 406 megahertz ELT, I only have a 121.5 when I did this, and so I went and got a Rescue Link personal locator beacon as a backup to that. So you could buy these little units and wear them, and it gives you a satellite connection if you were to have an emergency. Of course, now you can also get those satellite spider tracking sort of applications and boxes that can give you communication to the satellite system. But I didn't have that at the time, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money setting up a system I wasn't going to use very often. So I still like having the Rescue Link for long distance flights across middle of nowhere US, you know, Nevada. There's a lot of nothing out there. So good idea to have a backup if you don't have a 406 megahertz transponder.
I think that Canada now requires a 406 for all traffic.
I looked that up and it didn't seem like it, but I might be wrong. They're strongly encouraging it, was kind of thing.
About it for a long time.
Yeah, and I thought that was going to be the case too. So you might want to check into that because that might not be true anymore. But in 2018, it was still allowed. And I think it has to be built in, a regular 406. So.
Excuse me, Doug, 30 minutes from shore. Is that swimming, walking, or flying?
That's a good question.
Seriously.
I think it's flying, yeah, 30 minutes flight time from shore. So unless you were quite a ways offshore, you wouldn't, like the inside passage, you're not going to be. Of course, if you're flying over that terrain, you know, there's not a lot of places to land. You know, there's the really big trees or, you know, very cold water. So
Did you have a life raft?
I did not have a life raft. I had life preservers, but you know, hitting the water in those temperatures and hoping you come out right side up is not a good set of odds. So you know, you're like you probably all do. You're constantly trying to figure out, well, what's my best option? Almost the whole flight on the coastal route was that. So
Sandy Beach.
maybe, but it's all rocky, you know.
I'm kidding.
Everything's rocky, yeah. So it's challenging. And then these are the routes. I borrowed this from one of the presentations I went to in planning for my own trip. And they described 3 routes: the Alcan Highway route, the trench route, or sometimes it's called the 320 route because it's pretty much a 320 magnetic heading, and the coastal route. And I'm not sure what the other one is there. I guess that's just the other road. But you're not really going to get flight following or ADS-B much at all, except in the urban areas. So you want to contact flight service whenever you're in range and give them a position update, because if you have a problem, you want them to look in the right place if you have a problem. One of the things that I learned from another presentation is beware of power lines that have guy wires. They're often at the corners of roads. So if you're playing that mental game of where am I going to land, and you see a nice road, and it has a bend in it, there's a decent chance there's a guy wire crossing the road to hold the power pole as it goes around the corner. So this was from another very experienced pilot who'd flown in this remote area and had to make some landings on roads. So something to think about. You want to hit the straightaway and not right after the corner. I fortunately didn't have anything like that, of course. This was a route. I'm going to briefly talk about it because I think it reflects sort of when you have a trip like this, you constantly are changing because of weather. So like I said, we changed right away and didn't go to Port Hardy. We went to Campbell River, and then we went up to cleared customs at Ketchikan and took off again same day and went to, this is Glacier Bay, so Gustavus, Alaska. And I wanted to see the calving glaciers in the ocean, and I've got some pictures of that. It was just spectacular. And then we were planning to fly more coastal route up to Yakutat and maybe Valdez, but the weather changed, so it was time to change plans. So flew over the mountains to Whitehorse and avoided the weather. The weather on the other side of it was, of course, better. Just overnighted there, and then the next day we went to the port of entry back into Alaska. AOR is Northway. So at the Northway entrance station, we cleared customs. The poor guy had to drive like 2.5 hours just to get there. And we were being chased by a rainstorm, and of course it caught up with us right when he got there. So we're in this pouring storm, and that changed our plans again, because we were going to go from Northway to Anchorage, but now it was all socked in that way, so we went to Fairbanks, because that was an open route. So this trip was reflective of how you have to constantly change plans and have a real flexible mindset, not have get-there-itis, or you're going to get into some trouble. And from Anchorage, we actually landed at McKinley National Park. There's a gravel airstrip there. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Bill. And then went to Anchorage, Merrill Field, which was like flying into a combat zone. And I've never seen so much small GA traffic all wedged in about 600 foot of airspace, when there's some very, very limited approaches that you can take, because you've got the international airport, you've got the military airport, you've got the Fort Hood, you've got the lake, and you've got Merrill Field. So, and they're all in very close proximity. So it'd be a really good idea to get one of these if you're going to go. You know, this is the Alaska Chart Supplement, because there's a lot of things in here you can't hardly find anywhere else. Like the routes, the visual routes into Merrill Field are all specific things. You know, it says turn left over the high school, or turn over Costco or something. You're like, well, I don't know what that looks like. So, but they give you the coordinates, and then you can create your own waypoints on ForeFlight, or however you do your flight planning. So I did a lot of time with this book figuring out, you know, I didn't want to be caught unaware in the wrong situation, but that worked out fine. And then we were in there for a couple days waiting for the weather to improve. Went down to Homer, did some scenic flying over the Kenai Fjords National Park, and back to Homer, and then back up along Cook Inlet to shorten the water crossing. I don't like to fly over really long pieces of open water, so there are some islands. So if you get back to like Kenai, you can cross in a couple of steps with some potential gliding sites on some islands across the way. So we crossed that big water and then went down to King Salmon, which is, that's this one, P-A-K-N, King Salmon. And wanted to see the bears, you know, the fishing bears. So we went to Brooks Lodge on a float plane charter from there. And then back to King Salmon, and then flew, that's where you saw that earlier photo, up past Lake Clark, through that Lake Clark gorge that takes you back up into the Matanuska, Susitna Valley, Anchorage Valley. So, and then we had clear weather, so we went from there straight up to, back to Whitehorse, and then spent a night in Whitehorse, and then Whitehorse down the trench route back to Bellingham. So we got to see a little bit of everything a few times. A couple of stops in Whitehorse.
How long was your whole trip?
It was over 4,000 miles, and I'm trying to think how many days it was. I think it was like 16 days or 17 days.
Were you flying 16 days, or is that?
No, that was like time from home to home,
and
you know.
float plane.
Yeah, and there was like, you know, we were in Anchorage for a couple of days because the weather was not suitable to fly at all. So we rented a car and went to somewhere. So let's see. So weather resources in Alaska, it's actually better than it was when we went, but ForeFlight has different weather resources than it used to, but still not the same as the lower 48. The Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, and that's still active, I checked that, has this display still 5 years later. And these are still your useful resources. The best thing about Alaska is all of the really good webcams. So they got webcams at a lot of the really bad, high traffic, weather questionable routes. And so I found that to be really valuable, because weather is what you find, right? So there's nothing like being able to see what it looks like up ahead. And then, you know, Canada, you've got the Flight Information Center, the Kamloops number for flight planning, and that link works if you type it all out. But it's easier, again, to just Google Flight Planning Nav Canada, and you can get what you need there. This shot was when we were dodging the little local showers. I think this was actually coming back down the Fraser Valley towards Bellingham. The scattered showers like that. We also saw something similar along the Tanana River going towards Fairbanks. don't know if I pronounced everything right here, but I already kind of mentioned this, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but this is a page out of this book that gives you all the coordinates for all these named waypoints, you know, and if you're the first time you've flown in there, you might want to do your homework ahead of time and label them on your iPad. Saves you a lot of anxiety. So a lot of special flight rules area. Ketchikan, again, I couldn't find even in here adequate information for the Ketchikan special flight rules area. But again, there's a lot of tourist traffic. It's really congested. There's commercial traffic in close proximity. It's bounded by water and mountains in ways that make it quite tight. And so again, you want to show up there and know what the waypoints are, because they're going to call them out as visual waypoints. And if you don't know what they are or where they are, that can be a problem. So again, I couldn't find that in here. Maybe I just didn't look hard enough, but it was easier to just call the Ketchikan flight office and get some information or a link or whatever works best for you. And then Anchorage, for the same reason, has, you know, if you read more of this section about Anchorage, that'll start to tell you the kind of things I was talking about you can't be lower than this coming into Merrill Field or higher than this because of overflying traffic to the military and the domestic or commercial terminal there. So I don't know if you had that experience with Merrill Field being so amazingly busy, but it was quite a scene up there.
Maybe it's that way year-round.
Yeah, I'm sure. People fly all year-round. Well, in Hood, I guess they go on skis in the winter, probably, right?
They can, and at Merrill, they open in fact, you can see it on a 45 there if you point out to them what Merrill Field is. It's got a little 45, and that's a ski strip in the winter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is it right there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that probably even adds more winter complexity, but so I found this to be invaluable, necessary. You know, a lot of us don't use so much paper anymore, but it's hard to find this any other way. I kind of already covered this, but this is a shot of the Lake Clark Pass area, which is also really heavily trafficked on a lot of scenic routes and backcountry flights. And so, again, you'll hear other pilots call out their position, you know, and you want to know if they're at the west end narrows and where you are relative to that point. Because if you don't know, you can be at the same point in space and time, and that's not good. So that's pretty typical of what you'll see in the and Denali's covered with these too, as Bill would know. I mean, there's all kinds of reporting points that are specific to Mount McKinley or Denali. And you want to know where you are and where everybody else is, because if you're not a local, you know, it's when even here, you know, people say they're over some feature in the islands, and not everybody knows where that is. So it's important to do your homework. This was a thing I found on the Alaska Native Village alcohol prohibition. So there are some that are even on routes you might fly. Anituvic Pass is particularly restrictive. So if you're, as Maureen knows, if you're going to go to Barrow or the North Slope, you don't want to have anything in your plane at that stop, because you could lose your plane. Other places we have more of a possession rule or some other less restrictive thing, but it's illegal to possess and be on the ground there.
So just drink it before flight.
Yeah. At least 8 hours. So anyway, more information. So that's about all I had on the technical fact side of this thing. But again, many of you probably have experience that you could contribute to this as well. Yeah.
Alaska Pilots Association is a nice thing to join before you go as well, because they have a lot of information.
Yeah, we did that too. I'd forgotten to even mention that, but there's an overwhelming amount of information, I think, is kind of what almost the problem is for a person that isn't a local in Alaska and hasn't sort of grown up with the changes in the procedures. It can be overwhelming, but it's doable. You know, I mean, I'm not that experienced a pilot, and was less so at that point. So it's not something to be so intimidated as to not do. Yeah.
Did you find that June was the best time as far as weather?
I had lots of advice, you know, from people. Some said a lot earlier than that, like April. And I was like, really? I don't know about April. But June sometimes can be foggy a little bit, I was told. And then later in the summer, definitely I was told could be foggy, like August. I don't have a lot of experience in Alaska, few business trips. And it was foggy on the North Slope, I know, in late summer. So that was kind of what I was going by. And I also wanted the long days, so you get a lot more daylight to deal with flight planning, and you know, that's nice. You know, you're not going to be in the dark. So it worked out for us. We were in Fairbanks on the 21st of June, so it was very light all night.
When was this trip, Mark?
It was in 2018. I was planning to do this presentation 2 or so years ago, but that was BC, before COVID, so a long time ago. But still fresh in my memory about how special the whole trip was. So, yeah.
Did you have any trouble getting fuel in Yukon?
No, again, the only place we fueled, well, we fueled at 2 places. We fueled in Whitehorse and we fueled in McKenzie. And they give you free ice cream in McKenzie. But other than that, we didn't fuel in Canada, but it was very expensive to get fuel in King Salmon. It was like $9.80 a gallon or something. So you wanted to plan ahead and kind of have the right, you know, transport enough fuel for yourself. But I still had to buy gas there.
Have you been making trips into Canada just to Banff or?
I haven't. No, before this I did a few, kind of make sure I understand the border crossing procedures, and I might have just gone to Abbotsford or something, you know. So just to get comfortable and familiar before it was a more complicated itinerary. So yeah, a few other trips, but not a lot. Yeah, I'd like to do more of that. All right, is that it for any? Yeah, Maureen?
I was just going to mention, if you go into Canada and you fly into an AOE CAN pass only,
Right.
not just the pilot, but everybody in the airplane has to be CAN pass.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The accommodation.
Yeah, so yeah, if you're traveling with your spouse, everybody has to be CAN pass, or you have to go to the AOE 15 airports, which are a lot less flexible, or a lot less of them anyway. Yeah, great point.
When you flew the trench, where did you depart and where did you land?
Well, we departed Whitehorse, and we landed in McKenzie, and got gas, and then landed in Bellingham. So it's interesting. There's a couple of emergency landing strips too up there that used to be associated, I think, with logging or something. So it might be good to chart those out on your ForeFlight. You can see them on Google Earth if nothing else, and figure out where they are.
There's a map, a BC Air Facilities map, which is available through the BC Aviation Council.
Okay.
Which gives the location of every airport, land and sea in British Columbia. And it also, on the back of it, gives some information on those airports.
And that's what resource?
It's the British Columbia Aviation Council, but it's called a BC Air Facilities map.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't come across that. That would have been useful as a, you know, further enhancement to emergency planning there. So that's on the video now, so we'll have that resource for other potential planners. Anything else for?
Any issues with animals?
No, we didn't have to camp. Fortunately, we were able to find accommodations at the last minute in several places, but yeah, I think I'd definitely have bear spray if I was going to be there. You might not get to buy it until you're in Alaska, though.
Get it at Costco now.
Yeah, but I don't know about crossing the border with it.
Some duct tape.
Yeah, and maybe some duct tape. I've seen that video too, yeah.
You mentioned you had a somewhat of an off trip to go see the bears where the fish were jumping. Did that happen?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. We had to take a float plane because
Okay.
to get from King Salmon, which is a runway, it's the nearest runway. Brooks Lodge, I think it's called, is the kind of starting point for that. We couldn't get accommodations there, but to get to that location, you had to take a float plane. So we went and got the float plane in King Salmon, went up there, and then came back on the float plane to King Salmon before flying ourselves.
Was it like a fishing charter or just even a sightseeing charter?
I think it was probably mostly bear sightseeing was what that was flying, but they do a lot of fishing charters. The place we stayed in King Salmon was definitely a fishing lodge.
Yeah.
It was totally outfitted for that, and everybody but us there was fishing.
Sure.
Including the bears.
Captain Lay, there's a couple of different excursions you can do. One just to the lodge, where the rangers give you a briefing on the bears. You can't go outside the lodge until you've completed the briefing. They give you a little pin. Then you can walk up to the falls, But there's also excursions from there on a small bus out to the 10,000 Smokes, which is the volcanic area. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of things to do in King Salmon, you know, fishing on the river, but you know, there's some interesting things around the area.
Yeah, no, that's great. We didn't have time to do the 10,000 Smokes trip because it's kind of an all-day bus ride up and back, but Katmai was spectacular from the air, so that was, you know, almost half the fun of the trip. And then, like you said, the bears was, you get the briefing and you can't have any food on you. You have to put your food inside their electric fence area, and
No barbecue sauce?
no, that'd be a bad idea probably. But you're kind of down in their environment. I mean, you're walking on this trail and they got rangers looking to see if there's any bears, and they wave you through if you can go.
When we were up there was no rangers waving us around, my wife and I, and we just got pretty casual. We just kind of strolled up there. We got to the falls, and there's some grizz there, and we on the way back, we're going, here bear,
Yeah,
doing the clapping.
yeah, making
Yeah,
sure they could see you
knew-
coming.
We knew they were there then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're pretty much just minding their own business and looking for fish, but they're very big animals and very impressive. So the viewing platforms are raised, but they just have a ramp down to the ground. I mean, you walk on the trail to get to the ramp to go up for the overlook. So you're in bear territory for sure. The whole
If they
walk
come
in
up
there.
the ramp, you're like,
You're getting off the platform, I guess. But that's kind of what the rangers were trying to marshal, is to make sure, you know, they actually, I think, closed and made people wait for a while till some bears passed before they'd let you in. So, yeah, Maureen?
Yeah, I have crossed the border both ways with bear spray.
Oh, you can do it?
It's not an issue.
And
but
you declare it,
that
but
was
yeah.
2 years ago, so.
Yeah, I would check. You know, you don't know. It's become more of a thing lately, I think.
Just tell them it's the four-legged spray, not the two-legged.
Not the two-legged spray.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
It has to be labeled as bear spray.
Okay.
and no pepper spray.
It doesn't work on people.
Goes, I'd understood you can't cross the border with pepper spray into Canada.
But bear spray is allowed,
Bear
even though
spray's
it's,
allowed,
yeah.
peppers- They're two different worlds.
Yeah.
And
That's great.
you catch hell.
It's
Yeah.
repellent is approved across the border.
Okay.
Anything that would indicate it would kill a bear.
Well, yeah, not, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, well, the bear spray should just be a strong
They still allow you to
deterrent.
carry a rifle?
It's cumbersome to do, yes, but it just looked like, yeah, you had to get a permit and it looked difficult, and I ended up deciding not to do that. So it used to be really common, I guess, but,
Handguns are prohibited.
and handguns are prohibited, yeah.
You won't get your airplane confiscated.
Yeah, or your boat.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, they make it hell.
yeah, so that's all good tips. So anything else before I do the video? All right, let's do the video. Well, thanks for your attention. That's all I had prepared, but I hope you captured the fun we all have with flying. So,
Is Lenny for real or is he stuffed?
well, he's rubber. Yeah, when he gets nervous, it's a little bit bumpy ride. Yeah, he's kind of a turbulence indicator.
You gonna do another long trip? Do you have a hanker to go back?
I do have a bit of a hankering to go back. I not that it's really an obstacle, but just for simplicity, I went to basic med, so I have to go back and get a third class medical. And that's okay, but I just haven't put together a compelling enough reason yet to do it, because we did so much of our dream trip there with the bears and the, Denali and everything. It's like, well, maybe we could go out to Western Alaska or something and see some of that, but it's just a very complete trip for us. So we've done other trips, and I've made other videos of some traveling we did through California and Southwest and similar thing, just kind of it's really for family, for, my extended family likes vicariously participating, particularly my 90-year-old mother. So she flew with me from Chicago to Bellingham when I retired and we wrapped up my career. So she's a big enthusiast. So many of these videos are kind of made for her. And this is a slightly edited version, but I've got the Southwest trip and several other ones that I've kind of done something similar with. But it's just real simple on an iMovie. You can put this stuff together and put it on a disc, and it's about the right length, and it's not too hard to do. So,
Also, those landings were quite exceptional. There were some that she edited out.
Oh, well, I didn't know that they were all that exceptional, but the gravel runway was kind of, because you could hear it hitting the tail. Yeah, it was fun. It was Merrill Field was just mind-blowing to me. I mean, I was on that approach in there, that the visual that they give you, which is like literally it's like a 700-foot window you have to fly through if you're coming from the west. And the ATCs gave me like 4 targets. They're like, there's a 2 o'clock and a 6 o'clock and a 4 o'clock, and I'm just like head on a swivel, and then he goes, oh, and now go to tower. So now I go to the tower, and there's these airplanes all around, and I'm on the tower now, and the tower's really casual. He says, you're number 3 to land. So I'm like, where are those planes, So I'm looking for those, and I remember very distinctly because nearly had an error there, but I joined the downwind like you're supposed to, and he says, you're number 3 to land, and I go, well, there's one guy on short approach, there's number 2, I guess I'm number 3. Well, he'd already counted the guy who was still on short final as down. Oh. There was 2 airplanes in front of me, and I'm just like, this doesn't feel right, and I'm going a little bit, and I'm like, there's that other airplane. So, it was so busy that you really had to look out for yourself, because the tower controller was so busy, he was already counting that guy as landed. So anyway, it was an interesting experience on Merrill Field. It probably is easy for the locals because you just know the routine. But
you're just that much more comfortable with it just because of concentration.
Yeah.
City traffic.
It's like driving through town.
It's fine if you're thrown into it and it's all new to you.
Yeah,
it's clenched too.
Yeah, but it was a good challenge. I think that's one thing we probably all have learned, is that taking on something that's just a little more challenging is really good for you as a pilot. So try to keep doing something that pushes your limits just a little bit, not too much, but keep challenged. And that's what this trip was in quite a number of different ways, in planning and weather and flying and unusual conditions and different runways and certainly different visual approach procedures. So.
Did anybody notice on that gravel strip that under the nose wheel and stretching ahead of the airplane was a sheet of plywood?
Yes.
And that was to keep down gravel from getting in your prop, because you have to use some power to move from your parking spot. Yeah,
I was a little nervous about that, but didn't do too. I had a couple of chips on the tail, but I didn't really do any propeller damage. But it was something to be concerned about. That was also a little tricky because it was down in some tall trees, and as soon as the wind was definitely different down there because it was rolling over the trees, and so it was kind of squirrely taking off. But it was a nice long gravel runway, so not really a hazard, but it had my attention.
Taking off, or at least if you took off in the same direction you landed, there was a sharp drop off
Yeah.
at the far end of the runway. So when you're approaching from that direction, it can be a sinker.
Yeah,
right there.
because there's downdraft off the end of the runway. Yeah, Sedona's that way. It's got a real strong downdraft off the north end if there's a southwest wind.
So you had your planned IFR legs. Did any of the VFR legs kind of go south on you mid-flight?
No, I even did some provisional IFR planning. So that when we went across Cook Inlet, it was probably going to be visual the whole way, but from the weather you couldn't quite tell. And I actually hadn't done this before. I filed an IFR flight plan from a waypoint in space to King Salmon, and I figured I'm going to go right over that spot, and if I decide at that point the weather's changed enough, then I'll activate the IFR plan. And I did do that, but there was only just passing through a little cloud layer, and then I was under it. But you couldn't have probably done that without having to, be in the clouds briefly. So, and the other ones were kind of known, like the Homer segment. Just I knew it was going to be rainy, but I'd already waited a couple of days, and it was good enough to. The forecast was good enough to put the rest of the trip together the way we wanted. So, and there's not much terrain there. South of Anchorage to Homer is pretty flat, so it seemed like a good option. We didn't have to be real high, because it was, here like everywhere you worry about icing, and I imagine it's the same up there. But maybe that's one advantage to doing summer when the days are super long, is air's a little warmer. All right, so all right, thanks for your attention.